Hello and welcome to episode 50 of season 3 of Search With Candour. I am your host, Jack Chambers Ward. I'm wearing my Dungeons & Dragons Christmas jumper because it's nearly Christmas. I know we're getting towards the end of the year and I basically wanted to do a little Spotify wrapped, if you will, of the Search With Candour podcast throughout 2024. I'm going to give you the 10 most watched and most listened to episodes of the year, as well as some honourable mentions to the top 20 as well. I want to give a huge shout out to all the amazing guests I've had throughout the year. Don't worry, this isn't the last episode of the year. I'll be back next week. Mark will be joining me once again in the studio, and we'll be doing a little 2024 recap of all of the important SEO news throughout the year and have a nice little chat and conversation about that, as Mark and I often do. And for the final episode of 2024, we are joined by 3 very special guests. That's right, a 5-person episode. We're joined by Arnaut Helmans, we're joined by Begum Kaya, and we're joined by Yama Shimshek as well. The 5 of us will be talking about the best and worst things that happened in 2024 in SEO and making some 2025 SEO predictions as well. But before I get to the recap and the wrapped for this year, before I get to next week's episode and the following after that, here is a word from our sponsors. A huge thank you to SE Ranking for sponsoring this week's episode of Search With Candour. SE Ranking is the company behind the powerful and intuitive SEO platform trusted by millions of agencies, businesses, and SEO professionals since 2013. With a robust toolkit, SE Ranking empowers SEO professionals around the world to excel at executing their strategies. Key features include the Rank Tracker, which provides accurate and up-to-date keyword rankings, as well as the competitive and keyword research tools that offer deep insights into market trends and competitor strategies. The platform's AI-powered SEO insights leverage advanced machine learning to deliver actionable recommendations, streamlining the process and letting you outrank your competition. The Backlink Checker and Monitoring tool enables you to analyze backlink profiles and monitor their status, ensuring you've got a very healthy link building strategy. SE Ranking have launched their AI Overviews tracking feature. It's a brand new tool that allows you to track AI search engine snippets that will help you see how you stack up against your competitors in Google's AI enhanced search features. The tool supports you in identifying your rivals in the snippets, analyzing their content, and detecting new opportunities for strategic decisions. Click the link in the video description down below or in the show notes if you're listening to this episode. And a huge thank you to SE Ranking for sponsoring us here at Search With Candour. Optimizer is the modern PPC management software that is built by PPC people for PPC people. Optimizer contains everything you need to create, optimize, and automate high-performing paid campaigns across multiple platforms. As I just mentioned, we're going across platforms, and I think this is one of the best time-saving options and features when it comes to Optimizer. If you are advertising across multiple platforms, including Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook, then you need to be using these cross-platform tools. You can create reports, you can create shareable dashboards, you can share budgets and alerts across all of these platforms. If you are individually managing each of these things, you could save yourself a lot of time by using Optimizer's cross-platform tools. For monitoring, the alerts let you know when budgets have been exhausted or KPIs have been reached or missed. And when it comes to the rule engine, this allows you to set up custom rules to automate so many time-consuming and manual tasks that are part of your paid campaigns. You can easily automate rules. Basically, if you can write your strategy or tactic down, you can automate it. It's that simple. This can be especially helpful in things like e-commerce when it comes to stopping overspending of a particular ad. This is something I know from personal experience. I have had an ad that has overspent, and if I had used Optimizer, that would have saved my budget and saved my campaign in that instance, and I wish I'd used Optimizer at the time. You can also adjust bids and choose which products or ads are showing based on things like the weather and pretty much anything else you can put into a spreadsheet. It is fully customizable and automated, so you can choose when ads start and which products are showing depending on the time of year, depending on the weather, and so many other factors. It's all automated and makes the process so much easier. To sum it up, Optimizer is the award-winning all-in-one PPC toolkit that makes managing paid search easier, faster, and less prone to error. It puts you back in the control of your campaigns by allowing you to create and deploy your own automations across multiple ad platforms. You can start your 14-day free trial by going to optimizer.com. That's optmyzr.com. You can also click the link in the show notes. And if you want to see Optimizer in action, you can book a personalized demo with one of Optimizer's experts by clicking the link in the show notes as well. So you can get a 14-day trial or book a demo at no cost to you. Like I said, go and click the link in the show notes or the video description down below. And a huge thank you to Optimizer for sponsoring Search with Candour. Okay, so I have created a little presentation. We'll start off with the Spotify Wrapped for this year for the podcast, and I'll basically give you a peek behind the curtains, give you some insights or some data, because I know you're all marketing nerds out there, you're all SEO nerds just like me, so I think you'll appreciate some stats and some behind the scenes looks at the podcast. Let's have a look at my lovely little slideshow here. Here we go. Basically going to try and do this in one take, so bear with me as I essentially live edit myself in and out of these shots. We're going to be talking all about very exciting things like the Spotify Wrapped. I know you've probably already got your Spotify Wrapped. You also get it as a creator. So if you're posting music, if you're posting podcasts, anything like that on that side of things on Spotify, essentially, you get your own Wrapped, and I get to see some insights about you, lovely listeners on Spotify. If you're listening to this on audio, I promise I will explain things as you go. This is not purely visual, but you can go and watch the video on YouTube and Spotify as well, because as we'll talk about in a moment, Spotify does video podcasts now, which is very, very cool. So let's get stuck in. We grew by 32% of our listeners in 2024. That's very, very cool. I'm very, very happy. I did a typo of this in my LinkedIn post the other day, and Steve Payne from Systrix called me out. I just put plus 32 listeners, which is not as exciting as plus 32% listeners. So 32% more listeners in 2024 compared to 2023. Huge thank you if you're one of those new listeners joining us. That's very, very cool. 16% more streams. So streams are the ones where you don't download the episode, you just click the play button and kind of preview it essentially. That's very, very nice to see. And the one I'm very happy about is plus 45% followers on Spotify. We crossed the, I think, 1,200 follower mark, which was very, very cool, as well as crossing the 1,000 subscriber goal, essentially, on YouTube earlier this year as well, which is very, very cool. I hugely appreciate the support for that. But yeah, 45% more followers in 2024 than in 2023. Very cool stuff. Now let's look at the demographic, and I'll actually get rid of myself here so we can look at this properly. Most of our listeners are in a similar kind of age bracket to me, which is the 30 to 34, and 35 to 44 is actually our biggest. So give you a quick breakdown if you are listening at home. 4% of you are 18 to 24, 16% of you are 25 to 29. Here's my age bracket, which is 30 to 34 at 26%, and 35 to 44 is our biggest at 38%. So 45 to 54 is next at 13%, and the senior category, the 55 plus, at 3%. So I think it's interesting seeing we're kind of in that sort of 30 to 45 kind of demographic. I think that makes sense for a lot of people I'm talking to in marketing at the moment. A lot of people we see at conferences and stuff kind of fall into that kind of bracket. So that does make sense. Next up we have, what kind of music are you guys listening to? Which I found very interesting. Classical, indie, and pop. Classical, clearly you're a very classy group of people. That would not be my Spotify Wrapped at all. I think mine was various types of metal, funnily enough. If you know me, you won't be surprised by that, that's for sure. Next up, the show was in the top 10% of video podcasts on Spotify. That is a really cool statistic I think Mark and I are really, really proud of to see there, because there's been a big increase in video podcasts on Spotify, and I know Spotify are doing a big push now to kind of compete with YouTube as the #1 video podcast platform. So to see that me posting these as videos is actually paying off and helping, the fact they're in the top 10% of video podcasts on Spotify is very, very cool. Next up, we are in the top 10 basically in the top 10 most listened to shows for 367 people, which is very cool. If you're one of those people, let us know. I'm sure a lot of people will see us on their Spotify Wrapped for podcasts, which is very, very cool. And the one that is really, really awesome, we were the number one show that they listen to on Spotify for 61 people. That is awesome. Thank you. If we were your number one show on your Spotify Wrapped, on your podcast, that is awesome. And I hugely appreciate everyone who is a number one fan, a number one show for us. That's very, very cool of you to listen to us so much and enjoy the show. I've seen a few people share their Spotify Wrapped for their podcast and tagging us with Search With Candour on there. So it's very, very cool to see you guys supporting the show, listening to the show, and being loyal listeners and listening for a long, long time, which is very, very cool. Next up, the most listened to show on Spotify was episode 7 with Nate Matheson. Nate was a brilliant guest. We talked about how to make your content uniquely helpful. This was a big discussion about combating AI content and really getting to grips with what your content strategy should be in 2024. Bear in mind, this is all the way back in February, I believe, and it's an interesting discussion to have. Nate also, through his previous company, Positional, sponsored the podcast as well. So Nate has been a huge support, and very, very cool to see that Nate is the most listened to episode. I will get to the top 10 later on, and you'll see how much this affects Nate's positioning. No pun intended with Positional, because combining the YouTube views and the Spotify listens paints a very different picture. But Nate will come up later on, so I'll kind of discuss him in a bit more detail in a moment when we get to the top 10. Next up, kind of the summary of Spotify Wrapped. 45% follower growth. Top fans, 61 of you guys. Thank you again. The top country, the UK. Hey, cool, nice. I did spot there was another statistic that our youngest listeners are in Nigeria. So shout out to you, Africa SEO crew, the Search Africon people, I'm sure, are representing there. We hugely appreciate all the fantastic guests and listeners we have on that continent. I know you guys are very vocal and very supportive, and we are hugely supportive of what you guys are doing over in Africa as well. So yeah, average rating of 4.6 out of 5. I'll take it. That's pretty awesome. Anything above like a 4 is pretty awesome for a podcast on Spotify, so I'm hugely appreciative of that. But let's talk about the top 10 episodes of season 3, shall we? And there's my big face next to my little face here, and we're going to get into the top 10. So if you're watching on YouTube, this is literally a slideshow, so you're going to see transitions and stuff. If you're listening, I'll go through and basically do a little bit of podcasting and voiceover for you. Surprise, surprise. So let's kick things off with number 10. That's right, I'm talking about Dana DiTomaso from Kickpoint Playbook, and I've been following Dana for a very long time. I really love what she and the team over there are doing for their courses when it comes to analytics. For my money, Dana is one of the best people to talk to about analytics, about GA4, and it was just after they had announced that key events are essentially replacing conversions, and Dana was able to give me some really brilliant tips about customizing reports, something I continue to do, and I have literally done before recording this. I was customizing reports in GA4 based on the knowledge I gained from this episode. And yeah, one of my favorite people to follow, to learn from online, and it was a real honor to have Dana on the show. And I know Dana has been really supportive of the podcast as well, which is very cool as well. Next up, let's go to number 9, shall we? Number 9, Marco Giordano, very recent episode 46. Marco I have met at Brighton a couple of times, met at a few conferences. He is just the nicest, smartest guy, and I find Marco so fascinating when it comes to his data analytics. And again, something I learned a lot about from Marco is that ability to communicate complex data, to analyze it, and then communicate that to clients, to shareholders, to stakeholders, all that kind of stuff. It was a really fun episode, and hopefully, if you haven't already, basically you should go and check out all of these episodes. I will put links for everything in the show notes if you want to go back and watch and listen all of the top 10 episodes. Huge shout out to Marco. Like I said, met him a few times, and is always just so smart, so switched on, and full of fantastic data insights and data analysis, basically. Moving on to number 8, let's talk about the one and only Noah Lerner. Noah and I, thankfully, have stayed very much in touch. I am being a much more active part of the SEO community, something we talk about on the episode together. And funnily enough, this was the episode before Marco's, which is very cool. We've gone from episode 46 to episode 45. And yeah, now, I don't know if I've said this on the podcast before, I am co-hosting the Tuesday night meetups, which is called BS Time, as part of the Shooting the Poop series for the SEO community. I'm co-hosting that with Robin Allenson and with Arnout Hellmans as well, and it's been a lot of fun. It's very cool to be a bit more active in that community, because for my money, it is the best Slack community I'm a part of in terms of the SEO community, and Noah is doing a fantastic job. Funnily enough, this episode is one that has come up in conversation quite a few times when I bring up basically how people are doing their work, the actual methodology, the actual process you have to doing your day-to-day SEO work and marketing work, critical thinking, and the tips and skills and wisdom that Noah shared with me on that episode are hugely relevant and are things I often refer back to. So if you want to up your critical thinking skills, I hugely recommend this brilliant episode with Noah Lerner. Even though Noah was recording in his garden, but had to keep moving because his dog kept barking. So the setting and the background changes quite regularly, even though Noah was pretty much trying to get out of the chaos. It ended up causing a lot of chaos. But I think the episode came out really, really well. I managed to edit out all of the bits where Noah is walking around the garden trying to find a new spot. And yeah, I think the content speaks for itself, and the wisdom that Noah shares over his 20 plus year journey through SEO and through marketing and through data analysis and coding and all that kind of stuff. I think Noah is full of brilliant advice and wisdom, and I really, really recommend this episode. Next up, episode 7, Shonda Nicole. I absolutely loved having Shonda on the show. I think I mentioned it at the time. Shonda is one of the only people who has ever cold pitched me to come on the podcast, who I accepted and said, yes, join me on the show. I get a lot of cold pitches from people I have never met before, I don't know, who want to be like, hey, I think I'll be a great guest on your podcast, blah, blah, blah. If you're a podcaster out there, you know how this works. It's the same as like the link building stuff you get on LinkedIn, right? It's all that cold pitch stuff that never really works. This one actually worked because I thought Shonda had a really interesting story, and the way Shonda discussed being a real SEO nerd when actually she's most known for all of the content creations she's been doing, whether that was the Las Vegas ambassador stuff, whether that was the travel blogging, whether that was the food and the cookbooks and all that kind of stuff. SEO really was something Shonda doesn't often get an opportunity to talk about. So it was really, really cool to get down and kind of discuss into the rabbit hole of her process of content creation and why she's able to create that topical authority and build her brand around a few different topics. Plus, we got to talk about Mariah Carey, which is always fun. It's one of my favorite social clips I've ever done because I got to add in some Mariah Carey in there, which is always fun. Next up, let's talk about number 6, Patrick Hathaway. I know Patrick made a return to the show because he'd previously been on talking all about Sitebulb with Mark all the way back in the day. And we had Patrick back on again because Patrick and Jojo from Sitebulb reached out to me and were like, hey, we're doing this really interesting study. We've got some really interesting data about how the industry is feeling about JavaScript in 2024 when it comes to SEO. And I said, hell yeah, let's do it. That sounds really interesting. I know Patrick appeared on a few other podcasts as well, and I think Patrick and I had a really interesting conversation. And the thing that really stuck out to me from the data that Patrick and I discussed from that study is that a lot of people think you should read the Google documentation and basically get your fundamentals right, but not that many people have actually read the documentation when it comes to crawling, indexing, rendering, and all the JavaScript-y stuff that we kind of know about and we kind of talk about, but it seems like not many people actually want to read it. And I find that stuff fascinating, and it's definitely going to be something I'll be tackling in a future episode when it comes to one of the JavaScript wizards that is Jamie Indigo, who I'll be having on the show in January, which I can't wait for you to listen and watch. Next up, Number 5, my lucky number, it's Nate Matheson. Nate is back. Hello, Nate. Welcome back. Like I said, this is episode 7, so this is pretty early on when we were doing video stuff, and it was very cool to have Nate on the show from Positional. I think Nate has moved on to a different company now, but this was a very interesting conversation about content creation, about how to make your content uniquely helpful. Helpful content was what all we were discussing throughout the first half of the year, it feels like. And yeah, this was the most listened to show and the 5th overall most watched and listened to. So you can really tell how much we've grown on YouTube and how much YouTube is contributing to those numbers, which is very, very cool as well. Yeah, huge shout out to Nate. I know he's doing amazing things with his new company now as well. And huge shout out to Zach, who used to work at Positional as well, who made the connection, made the sponsorship happen. Positional were brilliant to us and supporting us in many, many ways. And yeah, did a fantastic partnership with those guys earlier on in the year as well. Next up, episode number 4, the 4th top episode of 2024. Maybe the nerdiest one we've done in a little while. The one and only Eric Hoover. Absolutely loved having Eric on, talking all about AI tools. It felt like one of those ones where we'd been kind of building up to it for a long time, right? We talked so much about AI and LLMs and all this kind of stuff, and finally we're able to unleash and discuss the details of how are you actually incorporating LLMs and AI tools into your workflow as an SEO, as a member of an SEO agency. Plus, Eric is a huge nerd. We got to chat about Star Trek. We nerded out about plenty of other sci-fi things. Eric and I think we need to schedule a catch-up, a virtual catch-up over a beer or a coffee or something like that. Or maybe we'll meet up at a conference in the future as well. Eric is definitely someone I am keeping an eye on. And fun enough, he recommends the book Unmasking AI by Dr. Joy Bolamani. She came up on my feed the other day, and I recommended that book to my uncle in a conversation the other day as well, because he was talking to me all about LLMs and AI and all that kind of stuff, and he knew I was kind of in that space, kind of in the techie space. So I had my uncle asking this question. It's like, I have a book recommendation for you. Maybe one of the most interesting books I listened to. I listened to an audiobook earlier this year, and yeah, it came from a recommendation from Eric, and I've been able to pass that recommendation on a couple of times. So if you haven't already, first of all, go and listen to these episodes, and second of all, go and either read, download, listen to, whatever it is, the Unmasking AI by Dr. Joy Bolamani. Fantastic book. Shout out to Eric. I thought it was a really, really fun episode, like I said, to finally get into the details around AI tools. Something I will peel the curtain back on a little bit as well. This was one of the ones where I was really playing around with YouTube thumbnails, YouTube titles, all this kind of stuff. And I made the smallest change in the YouTube title, and it made a massive difference in how many views we got on that episode. It was a tiny little tweak. I think it was something along the lines of, I had like SEO AI tools, and it was AI swapped to AI tools for SEO or something like that. Literally swapped the words around, adjusted the wording ever so slightly, and you can literally see the views and engagement graph just shoot up. And yeah, it was really kind of nice and rewarding to get that real-time fast feedback for experimenting and doing lots of testing I've been doing on YouTube throughout the year. So very, very cool. And yeah, like I said, shout out to Eric for a fantastic episode as well. We're into the top 3 now. Let's talk about an absolute ray of sunshine that is Beth Woodcock. Absolutely loved having Beth on the show. I know she is now doing amazing work over at Clicky. Shout out to Alex Wright and the Clicky team as well. And I know they're doing amazing things over there. Very lucky to have Beth on the team. And it was so much fun to have a chat with Beth. I'd very, very briefly met Beth in Brighton previously, but it was so great to finally sit down. And as you can tell, if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, she's just an absolute delight. Even the profile photo kind of sums up Beth's attitude, the atmosphere that she creates when she walks into a room, and yeah, full of really interesting technical SEO insights. It was a fantastic kind of discussion if you're thinking about getting into technical SEO, if you've been doing mostly content stuff, or you've been doing mostly digital PR stuff, whatever it is, and you're thinking about where do I start if I want to learn about the more technical SEO side of things. This is the episode for you. That's episode 12 of season 3 of Search With Candour. And basically Beth details her whole journey and some brilliant book recommendations, some resource recommendations. I think it resonated with a lot of people because it's a really kind of common story, right? We all try to understand various different bits of this industry and maybe want to branch out and learn a few more things. I know I've definitely done this, and I think I mentioned it on the episode as well. It's like, yeah, I've tried to be a bit more technical this year. I've tried to do more things or use this and understand this and learn this and all that kind of stuff. And Beth was a huge influence for that. And yeah, huge shout out to Beth for the brilliant work she's been doing over at Clicky. Top 2, the number 2 episode of 2024, Matt Coley. This reigned as the number 1 episode for a very long time, all the way back from episode 5. It's all the way back in early February of this year. And I really struck gold with Matt. It was very nice to basically catch up with him at Brighton. We had a little chat. He was previously on the show when I did a Brighton recap. I think it was last year's September. No, it would have been the one before that, maybe the April. And it was great to chat with Matt. We had a little sit down. I got some horror stories from him, all this kind of stuff. And he was like, oh, we should do a full episode together. I was like, absolutely, man, let's do it. He was very proactive, thankfully, and was like, hey, man, let's do that episode. And a few weeks later, literally a few months later, we recorded this episode about Matt's journey from agency side to freelancing. And again, I think this is a common theme for Beth's episode and for Matt's episode, and why they've resonated with so many people is because it's a pretty common journey. I think it's a shared experience for a lot of people when people want to take their life into their own hands, move on their career and become a freelancer. That has definitely been a theme I've seen speaking to a lot of colleagues throughout the year, speaking to a lot of peers throughout the year, even speaking to a lot of guests on the podcast. A lot of people are moving towards freelance SEO, moving and kind of taking charge of their career paths and all that kind of stuff. And hearing the details and the real kind of day-to-day recommendations from Matt about his early stages and his journey into freelancing was really interesting. As someone who has basically done no freelancing whatsoever, I have helped friends out and built websites for them and stuff like that, but never actually as a business thing. I've always worked for a company. My main income source has always been with a company, with an agency. In the case of my SEO work, I've entirely worked agency side. And there was this real kind of, interesting details from Matt that I wouldn't have expected. I think it's really insightful. If you're ever thinking about going freelance and you want to get some details, I highly recommend this episode if you do want to go and basically learn about what it takes and some of the things you might not realize about becoming a freelancer and working in SEO as well. Well, let's go to the honourable mention, shall we? I'll get off the screen here and bring in the top 20. So this is going from 11 to 15 and then 16 to 20. Let's get in 11 to 16. Shout out to episode 30 with Vince Nero from BuzzStream. I know Vince and I have stayed in touch. We finally met up in Brighton in person. We hung out quite a lot in Brighton, actually. I really like Vince. I really enjoyed hanging out with him. He happened to be staying at the same hotel as all of us in Candour as well, which was very nice. And we got to chat a lot about digital PR and why it matters in 2024, what separates it from so many of the other link building strategies that are going on basically around a lot of what link building and SEO is in 2024. Next up, episode 36 with Ashley Liddell. Fantastic episode talking about basically social media and how that ties into SEO. Funnily enough, I caught up with Ashley the other day after the SEO in 2025 live stream that happened last week, and it was a really interesting conversation that he kind of continued. This has really been the search everywhere kind of experience that I know that Ashley and the team over at Deviation are talking a lot about when it comes to thinking outside of the SEO box. And surprise, that's also kind of been the theme for 2024 as well. I think a lot of people have been kind of thinking about that when it comes to the overall landscape of search and social and paid. We need to stop thinking about SEO as a silo, essentially. I think is what everybody's saying. There's a big element here when it comes to how much changes have been happening with Google. Again, something Mark and I will be talking about next week, and something we also discuss in the finale episode with Arnaut, Yammer and Bigum as well. But I think this is kind of one of those earlier conversations for me where we're thinking about why SEO should not be siloed. and why it needs to be a wider conversation, essentially. Next up, we have the first episode of the season with Matt Hepburn talking all about enterprise SEO. Really, really interesting. Again, someone I've stayed in contact with. Shout out to Matt. I know he's doing a lot of hard work and a lot of brilliant work at the moment. And yeah, very, very cool to have someone so interesting and so knowledgeable on the very first episode of this season of the year. The very first video I shared on our YouTube channel, which is very cool as well. I've learned a lot about video editing over the year and video recording and all that kind of stuff. The fact that we've gone from this video, and I've looked back, my editing isn't great. Thankfully, the conversation is great, so it still maintains there, to now having a look at what we did with 2 cameras, 5 people, 5 microphones, and a completely different setup when it comes to that finale episode in a couple of weeks. I think you can see the progress of the Candour video production, which is very cool. Next up, it is Maria Scheibengraf. Absolutely loved having Maria on the show. Somebody I've spoken to a lot online, but I'd never actually met in person. And we got to talk all about why localization is more interesting and important and essential than just translating. When it comes to keyword research, when it comes to writing content, you need to be localizing stuff, not just translating it. And I think that is a message that has resonated very, very much so. I think a lot of people in the translation community, a lot of people in SEO, working in international SEO. When I went to International Search Summit in Barcelona earlier this year, there was a big conversation about the nature of localization and cultural differences and all this kind of stuff that I think Maria summed up really, really well when it comes to applying it to your processes of keyword research and content creation and all that fun stuff. Speaking of people I've stayed in contact with, Josephine Rudolph. This is a fantastic episode about networking for introverts. I thought Josephine brought some really interesting and insightful tips and tricks and all that kind of stuff for networking. Josephine is incredibly young, like 10 years younger than me, which terrifies me, how brilliant she's been doing in her career so far. I know she's doing amazing work with the team, Reg and Erin over at Women in Tech SEO. She's been doing a lot of their social stuff, which is very, very cool. I know she's about to start a new job as well, which is very exciting. Huge congratulations, Josie, if you are listening or watching. And it was a very interesting conversation all about networking and little tips like meet up beforehand with somebody you know, so you have someone at least you can kind of rely on in the sea of a massive conference. And it's always for me where you walk into a room and it's 1,000, 5,000, 250 people you don't know. Just having 1 or 2 familiar faces can make such a big difference and really impact your experience at that event. And yeah, Josie was full of recommendations, tips, and all that kind of stuff for that exact kind of thing. If you're looking to do more networking in 2025, highly recommend that episode with Josie as well. Next up, we have the next 16 to 20. Ray Sadiq, kind of coming off of, this was the one that really planted the seeds for me in many ways of the conversation I had with Ashley. This is back in episode 23. We talked a lot about basically how to incorporate social media into your content creation in SEO. Again, that you need to not be siloing SEO conversation that so many of us are having. I think that is a wider conversation, and the episode I did with Ray was a real kind of spark influence moment for me to get behind that process and really kind of push for it. And having that conversation with so many people, including clients and everything like that, has been really, really interesting. Next up, a bit of an SEO legend in Nikki Pilkington. It was very funny actually when I recorded the episode with Nikki. It was a brilliant conversation about misinformation and how that has become such a problem in SEO, in search, in Google, all that kind of stuff. And I think I labeled it as misinformation and toxic people in SEO or something like that. And Nikki DM'd me being like, hey, maybe you want to say we're against those things on the podcast title rather than just saying the thing we're talking about. It's like, oh yeah, it's like how to battle against misinformation. How do you fight misinformation? That's the actual thing we were talking about, not just discussing various forms of misinformation. Nikki, like I said, has been in SEO a very, very long time, since before Google, and it was a brilliant conversation. picking her experiences throughout the years and her experience as a freelancer, her experience from working in with so many different clients, with so many different companies over the years. It was a really, really interesting episode. I know multiple people had messaged Nikki directly saying, oh, I really enjoyed you on Search With Candour. So hugely, hugely appreciate any of you who reach out to the guests and say, oh, what a great episode. Thank you so much. All that kind of stuff. It means a lot. Speaking of awesome people, Riley Hope is an absolute badass when it comes to reporting and talking and working with small businesses. I said this to Riley a couple of weeks ago, actually. She has like the best profile pictures. Like they're just cool Polaroid style, interesting, cool photos. And I'm always jealous that I have this kind of like fairly formal, for all that phrase, headshot kind of things for social media. Riley is always doing something creative, always doing something cool. I know she has a new website and a new freelance kind of gig, essentially, she's working on and doing amazing work there. It was a really interesting conversation, like I said, about reporting for small businesses, whether you're aligning your KPIs with your client's interest, whether you're determining what kind of software you're using to report. It was a really, really interesting conversation with Riley, and a really early one as well, like I said, all the way back in episode 3 back in January. So highly recommend you go and check that out. Next up, it is Websites 101, episode 6 with Alex Harford. I mentioned nerding out with Eric Hoover, a fellow nerd as well in Alex. We were talking about 8-bit and 16-bit RPGs and doing very nerdy video game stuff even before we started recording. One of the most technically challenging to record, because Alex had a lot of issues when it came to his internet connection, kept cutting out and stuff that was heavily edited in the end. But I think the content kind of speaks for itself. The fact that it is one of our top 20 most listened to, most watched episodes. Alex had some really interesting insights coming from the developer side of things and kind of reminding us a lot of the fundamentals of how websites work, how the internet works, and really kind of keeping those fundamentals in mind when it comes to doing our SEO work. Because I think a lot of us can get carried away with all the shiny, sparkly new content stuff and new tools and new tricks and blah, blah, blah. It was really nice to have that conversation with Alex to cement us back into the fundamentals again. It was very, very cool. And last but not least, the top 20 is rounded out by Simon Lesser from Dragon Metrics back in episode 26. Again, this was kind of a little peek behind the curtains, which was very cool, looking at how SEO tools work, what kind of data they're getting, how they get their data, the years that Simon has worked in SEO tools, and specifically moving from an agency and from a company that he helped build onto something like Dragon Metrics, which he also helped build as well. And it was a really interesting conversation because Simon is a super, super smart dude talking about how he has grown Dragon Metrics, how they're evolving it without, kind of copying the competitors, essentially, how you need to do something differently. And I know, the team behind Also Asked, I am not part of that team for the record, but Mark and the developer team behind Also Asked have a similar mentality, trying to do something different, trying to do something unique in a sea of SEO tools that are all basically trying to do the same stuff, it feels like. So, huge shout out to Simon from Dragon Metrics, who I've met quite a few times at Brighton now. Always nice to see a familiar face, and he's always very welcoming and full of insights and wisdom as well. Right, we're on to the number 1 episode for 2024. And I believe this is now the most watched / listened to episode in the history of the podcast, because it got some serious numbers on YouTube, which makes a big difference. And it is, of course, the one and only Darren Shaw from White Spark. I think I said this on the episode. Darren is one of my favorite creators in SEO, let alone local SEO. He's making some brilliant video content. He does excellent YouTube stuff. The team at White Spark and what they're doing with all of their articles and blog content and guides and how-to and all that kind of stuff. Doing some brilliant, brilliant content creation. And he even does great TikTok videos as well. He does short form stuff. In general, I'm a huge, huge fan of Darren and the quality of the content and advice and articles and all that kind of stuff. And for me, it was a kind of weird moment, kind of Star Trek-y kind of moment, because Darren contacted me to come on the show. And I know I said earlier, I don't really take cold pitches for guests and all that kind of stuff, which in general is true. This wasn't a cold pitch. I've been following Darren for years, and he was like, hey man, I'm going to be talking about my top SEO podcasts that I listen to. I want to recommend Search With Candour. Would you be interested in that? Do you want to provide a quote? Blah, 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 blah. I was like, wait, you listen to my stuff? You watch my stuff? That's crazy. I watch and listen to you all the time. That's bizarre. And we had this really nice moment of creators and collaborators kind of realizing like, hey, we should work together. We should do something together. Thankfully, we made this episode happen. And it's one of my favorite episodes I've ever done. And it clearly very much resonated with a lot of people on YouTube and Spotify as well. I think it's the 3rd or 4th most listened to on Spotify. And it is by far and away the most viewed on YouTube. So the YouTube numbers really, really did brilliant for us there. Huge shout out to Darren for basically giving me an exclusive look and an exclusive reveal of the local search ranking factors for 2024. Because he'd been so busy and because he'd been so caught up in everything else that was going on in 2024, there was no official update to the local search ranking factors in 2024. We had them in 2023, went through to 2025. They're going to be coming out fairly soon, funnily enough. But I got the exclusive basic preview, little sneak peek, little reveal of the local search ranking factors for 2024. And it was brilliant content, really interesting stuff. Shout out to what a lot of the team over at White Spark are doing with all of the local SEO stuff that they're doing. And like I said, huge shout out to Darren Shaw, the brilliant work he's been doing throughout the last few years or so in terms of video. I know at the time of recording during December 2024, he's doing the Days of Rankmas because of course he is. He's doing silly, fun stuff in video form all the time. And I hugely recommend you go and listen to that episode. If you're interested in local search and local SEO at all, massively recommend that episode with Darren. One of my favorite episodes I've ever done and our number one for 2024. So huge congratulations to Darren Shaw. I'll email him a GIF of a trophy or something and celebrate that way and do it like that. And last but not least, of course, we want to say a big thank you to you for watching and listening, essentially. It's been very, very cool to go through this podcast, do this show for the last coming up to 3 years now. I thought 2024 was one of our best years in terms of guests, in terms of content, in terms of quality, in terms of growth as well. We've really, really grown throughout the year, and it's all thanks to you watching and listening at home. I know I say this every single week. I was like, thank you so much for watching and listening, all that kind of stuff. I really do mean it. I know sometimes it can seem like I'm in podcast mode and I'm just saying the thing that people say, like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. I really do mean it. I hugely appreciate anyone who does listen to the show, like the YouTube video, give us a rating on Spotify, all that kind of stuff. It makes a big difference. It's the kind of stuff Mark and I are discussing towards the end of the year that literally goes into my career appraisals. Like, these metrics matter to us and help us grow the show. And like I said, we've got huge plans for 2025. We've got big plans for a new type of event conference that we'll be doing. Search and Orange XL is hopefully happening later in the second half of 2025. We will have lots of brilliant video content. I've even got dare I say this out loud? I've got a Also Asked podcast idea brewing away in my brain that pretty much like 2 or 3 people in the world know about, including Mark. So yeah, lots of cool content, lots of brilliant things. Like I said, huge shout out to Darren and the other top 10 and the top 20 of the most listened to, most watched episodes of 2024. Thank you to the guests that have joined me throughout the year. You've got some great guests joining me coming up in 2025. I will have already recorded those episodes here in December, ready for January. So stay tuned for, I teased it earlier, a conversation with Jamie Indigo. Someone who I feel like I should have definitely had on the podcast already, to the point where Jamie messaged me and was like, hey, we haven't done a podcast together, have we? I was like, oh my God, we haven't. We talk all the time about nerdy things like D&D and metal and SEO stuff. And if you want to get nerdy with tech SEO stuff, Jamie's the kind of person you want to be talking to. So yeah, Jamie Indo is coming up. I'll also be talking about how much links matter or don't matter with Tamara Navitovic coming up. Yeah, in January as well. We'll be talking all about really interesting things throughout January. And of course, we'll be back. Mark Williams-Cook and I will be back talking all the latest SEO news recaps and all that kind of stuff. Planning to have some more in-person guests as well. Maybe we'll set up the studio again like we did, like I said, episode out in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, I'll be back next week with Mark. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with Arnaut, Begum and Yama here in the Candour Studios to make our predictions for 2025. Until then, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, have a brilliant break. I hope you're able to take some time off to relax, see loved ones, drink good drinks, eat good food, watch nice, good movies, read good books, whatever it is you do to relax, and everything else. Enjoy it, have a lovely time, and I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, and thank you so much to every single guest I've had on in 2024. It's been a hell of a year, and I'll see you in 2025.